Shirley?
Hi, hey Joseph, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Just a second, I approved all the participants.
Okay.
And there's a few word in Hebrew. טוב, שלום לכולם, אנחנו ממש נתחיל עוד דקות אחדות. אני בינתיים מאשרת את המשתתפים וגם אביגיל כאן איתנו, שהיא תנחה את האירוע. אז אנחנו נמתין כמה דקות, בערך 5 דקות, 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll start.
Hello, this is Finder.
Yes, hi.
I'm from Jerusalem and I love very much to read your books.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
טוב, יש לכם כמה דקות באמת לומר כמה מילות שלום לג'וסף עד שנתחיל את האירוע הרשמי, אז זה הקיו שלכם אם בא לכם לומר משהו. אני כן אומר מראש שאני אשמח שהמיקרופונים יישארו על מיוט במהלך השיחה, פשוט שלא יהיו רעשי רקע, ואנחנו כמובן ניתן זמן לשאלות, אז קחו זאת גם בחשבון, תשמרו את השאלות, ראינו גם שהרבה כתבו, אז גם לכך יהיה זמן.
Not Finder, but האוליגרך.
לא ש... מי דיבר? אנחנו בעיקר נעסוק כמובן בספר החדש, The Oligach Daughter, בת האוליגרך בעברית, אבל כמובן גם נדבר על כל ההיסטוריה הענפה, הספרותית והמקצועית של ג'וסף. אני כן אומר מראש, כולכם בטח הבנתם שהמפגש יהיה בשפה האנגלית, אני ואביגיל נשתדל לעשות כמה שניתן תרגום סימולטני, וזהו אביגיל, נחכה אותך עוד 2 דקות ככה.
כן, ניתן עוד כמה דקות.
טוב, אנחנו נתחיל, אני כמובן אאשר במהלך המפגש עוד אנשים, אבל אנחנו נתחיל ממש עכשיו. So good evening everyone, we are delighted to welcome Joseph פיינדר, the author of the best-selling novel The Oligach Daughter, בת האוליגרך, translated by Sharon Premirge to Hebrew. It's a pleasure and the honor for us at Sטימצקי to host you, Joseph, at the first time, I think so, in Israel. So we are really thrilled to be part of this event. The special evening will be hosted by our own Abigail. Hi, Abigail. And we do our best to leave plenty of time for your questions. תכינו את השאלות עד הסוף. וזהו, אני מקווה שכולכם קראתם את הספר, הוא נמצא בתשייה של סטימצקי עד סוף החודש, במחירים מאוד מאוד אטרקטיביים. לקח הרבה, יחסית, לא הרבה, אבל מ-2019 למעשה לא יצא בשפה העברית ספר של ג'וזף, אז זה ממש התרגשות מבחינתנו, שבשנה הזאת יוצא ספר חדש, וזהו, בואו נתחיל.
יאללה. אז ערב טוב, אני רק אגיד לפני זה ברמה הטכנית לגמרי, שאלות בסופו של האירוע, כמובן נשאיר זמן. אני חושבת שהכי מניסיוננו הכי טוב והגיוני שתכתבו אותן בצ'אט, ואחר כך אני אעבור אחד אחד. אני מעדיפה שתשאלו בקולכם ותנהלו את זה כשיחה, אבל למען הסדר הטוב הכי נוח זה באמת לכתוב את זה, ואז אני קוראת לכם, וכולם נשארים על מיוט, ואז אין גם הפרעות ברקע. אני אעבור עכשיו לאנגלית. אני אשתדל, אם יש איזה בעיה, משהו לא ברור, אני מדברת מהר מדי, מה שלא קורה לי אף פעם כמובן. אתם יכולים להתריע בצ'אט, הוא פתוח אצלי, ואני אשתדל לשים לב גם לזה. עכשיו אני אעבור לאנגלית. Sorry, mostly technical issues. So good evening. Like Shirley said, we are very, very, very happy and excited to have Joseph פיינדר here with us this evening. Among all the problems that the war has caused, we are sadly seeing less and less authors who are arriving in the country for literary events or are willing to participate in events in Israel. So it's very significant for us. And so tonight we are hosting Joseph פיינדר. He is one of the most acclaimed thriller writers living today. He has won many, many awards. I tried to make a list. There were too many. Several of his, if I counted correctly, 19 books so far.
Yeah.
Yes? Yay. Have been adapted to films. And also when I did my research, which is something that I think both literary editors, writers, and spies should know how to do, I discovered that we share a birthday, which was kind of fun.
October 6th?
Yeah. So
Nice.
coming up. Yeah.
Nice.
I read once statistics that if you put 100 people in a room, 2 will share a birthday. So we are the 2 today. What I also learned is that you went to Yale and then you also went to Harvard. So I'm assuming I am not the only one right now feeling like an underachiever and a little uncomfortable. You majored in Russian studies, and you also taught at Harvard.
That's right.
Yeah, and eventually there was an attempt to draft you to the CIA.
Yes.
Yeah, so with all these amazing accomplishments, and as a writer and editor myself, I have to ask, why would you choose a dubious career as being an author?
Overworking for the CIA?
Over teaching at Harvard, working at the CIA, and any other possibility for a slightly more stable life.
Well, my parents really wanted me to be a lawyer. They absolutely wanted me to go to Harvard Law School and become a lawyer. And my older sister, who had gone to Harvard Law School and was a lawyer, told me not to do it. She said, "You're too creative to do it," to her credit. And I had wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, even though, my parents tried to talk me out of it. And I knew I was not going to be the right sort of company man to work in the CIA. You have to be good at handling bureaucracy and a good player, and that was not me. So I knew I would not succeed very well at CIA. So I decided to try to write and see how I did. And I figured after a few years, if it wasn't working, I would do something else. And I sold my first novel, The Moscow Club, to something like 40 countries, and it did really well. And I was launched. I was on my way. So it didn't seem to be as scary a possibility as it might have been.
Yeah, which is pretty rare.
It is rare. I'm very lucky. I know that. I know that.
Very talented.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think also the market, certainly in terms of size, but also in terms of sort of the way it works, and agencies and publishing houses is slightly different there, well, a lot different than it is here. But still, when I kind of looked at, the possibilities, I said, okay, interesting choice.
Yeah.
Um, Lucky for us. So, like I said, you majored in Russian studies, which wasn't surprising having read this novel. But when I looked at your other novels, I was surprised to see that a lot of them have absolutely nothing to do with Russia.
Right.
So, I want to ask both about why you would choose to go back to it, and also kind of try and relate it to what's going on today. Because writing about Russia currently feels, and publishing about Russia currently feels different than it did 5 years ago.
Yes, exactly. I had wanted to return to writing about Russia for a long time, but it seemed to me that everyone who was doing it simply had books with Russia as the bad guy. And it felt constraining to me. It felt like it was too much of a cliche. I wanted to do something more original than that. Um, I'm not saying that Putin is a good guy, believe me, but I'm saying that books in which Russia overall is the enemy didn't really interest me until I came up with this idea about Russian oligarchs, who I was really fascinated by. They they were like they had become like merchant princes. They were not just traveling around the world and they were billionaires, but they were also philanthropists, giving a lot of money to universities and hospitals and museums and donating wings and buying the biggest yachts and private jets. And I just sort of thought that this was an opportunity to write about this weird world in which these oligarchs were, in a sense, laundering their reputations by virtue washing themselves. Uh, I mean, the Tate Modern named a building after one of them, for example. And it felt like this was the Gilded Age. And back when Henry James wrote about the Gilded Age in England and the United States, the nouveau riche money bags were Americans. Today, the money bags are Russians. And I thought, what would it be like to marry into such a family? And that's what was the idea that grabbed me, first of all, about writing The Oligarch's Daughter.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it kind of relates to my next question. Um, I have to confess, I am not a big thriller writer. It's not my genre usually. I read this during a trip to London. I actually got lost in London quite a few times because of the book, because I kept missing my tube stations because I was in the middle of reading. So I saw many things that I had no intentions of seeing in London. But I have no regrets. And I really enjoyed the book. And I think in some way I really enjoyed it because I was not fully convinced that it is a thriller after all. So I thought it was about a lot of things that were much more complex than, who killed who or who stole from who. One of which was what you just said about marrying into such a family, and where does one fit in or doesn't fit in. But I wanted to ask more about what you thought the book was about. And I want to kind of try and specify Amos Oz, which we all probably know, and I hope you've heard of him too, said once that every book is actually three books. There's the book you wrote, there's the book I read, and there's the book you wish you had written, which I think is a beautiful quote. So I kind of want to hear in your words, what you wrote or what you wish you'd have written, because I know what I read, and everyone here probably has, their answer of what they read.
Well, it is in my mind two things. It is a love story and it is a chase novel. And I wanted to combine the two and weave them into one novel. So the novel that I wanted to write was a love story and a chase novel. That was my intention. Until Russia invaded Ukraine. And suddenly everything was different. The oligarchs were sanctioned. Their yachts were seized. Their mansions were seized. They became non-persons. And at first I thought, damn, there goes my book. Until I realized I could make this book deeper and richer if I did two timelines, one before the Ukraine war and one during it, where the oligarchs go from being merchant princes to being on the run, hunted, their yachts and their mansions seized, making it richer and deeper and frankly a lot more interesting to me. So the book sort of evolved as I wrote it and as events caught up with the book. So I don't know if I can answer for you what sort of book I wish I'd written. That's the sort of book I wish I'd written, and it turned out to be that. It's different from a lot of the other books I've done, and I believe it is less predictable and less of a classic thriller for that reason.
Yeah, I think you also, some of the plot twists were absolutely amazing for me. I'm not going to go into it. I'm hoping everyone finished reading it, but I can't promise, so I won't do any spoilers. But yes, I think in terms of, I generally, plot twists don't surprise me unless they're, something of personal involvement or, something that I really, it doesn't surprise me if he murdered him or he, if any other character, but I am surprised by the way people sometimes in novels characters in a personal way manage to surprise me, and that happened at least three times that I can think of in this book, where I was like, okay, I didn't see that coming.
Good.
So that was that was like I said, I kept missing my stops. So I want to talk a little bit about something a little more technical, and then I want to go into things like research and how you go about writing such a, first of all, big and then very wide spanned novel. But I want to first talk about the name of the novel, and I also see that someone asked about the covers and the translation, so we might cover that too. But The Oligarch's Daughter, when I first saw it, I thought it didn't sound like a thriller. Again, it kind of references to, at least in Hebrew, we have a lot of the daughter, and it usually kind of maybe goes more into historical romance or fantasy novels, and it kind of goes more that way. Whereas with thrillers, I usually expect like a one-word title or something a little more stiff. So I
Yeah.
wondered about that.
Yeah, well, there are titles like Hostage or something, which you read that and you know it's going to be a thriller.
Exactly.
Right. I wanted to signal that this book was more than a thriller. And I wanted to signal that the central character in the book is not necessarily Paul Brightman, but this woman, uh, Tatiana, and what and how she appears to Paul throughout the book and until the end of the book. And so she's actually the most important character in the book. And I thought it made sense to name the book The Oligarch's Daughter for that reason.
Right. I mean, commercially as well, I think it was a very good choice, at least here, which is always important. Karen asks, Karen, do you want to ask yourself?
Sure. Hi. It's
Hi,
nice meeting you. I'm so excited.
thank you.
I haven't read the latest book yet, but I will for sure. But the question that I wrote is, many years ago, I lived in New York City and I met one of your colleagues, Harlan Coben. I
Mhm.
went to his signing and I was holding my books of him in Hebrew. Um, and he looked at the books and the covers and he was like, oh, I don't recognize this one and this one. So I was wondering, um, how involved are you with, when your book is out of the US and in other countries and it's to be translated? How are you involved in choosing the covers, the book titles? Because at least here in Israel, it's not always the same as it is in English when they translate the titles. Uh,
Yes.
so that's what I was wondering.
Well, I don't have anything to do with the titles that my foreign publishers choose. They translate the book and sometimes they keep the same title but translate it into Finnish or Swedish or something like that. But they change titles. Israel changes titles on me as well. Uh, and nobody consults me. It just happens. Um, I am involved in choosing the title in the US and the UK and in the cover art as well. My publisher has been very good in allowing me um, do to have input into the cover. Um, in fact, it was my wife who saw an early draft of the Oligarch's Daughter cover and said, "This is pastel. It has to be red. It's a Joe Finder novel. It's about Russia. It has to be red." And we changed it to red, and I thought it worked.
Yeah.
Thank you.
From a publisher's point of view, because that's what I do in my everyday life, um, yeah, we try and keep original titles sometimes for commercial reasons. Again, which is not a dirty thing to me. I mean, we publish a book, we want as many readers to pick it up and want to buy it. This is why we do what we do. Sometimes, yeah, we feel like it doesn't translate well, or there are like word games or, expressions that are not common. And also, we want it to look like what it is. I mean, if it's a thriller, we want, like you said, it should be red or it shouldn't be pastel, or which
Mhm,
again is why the title. Yeah, exactly.
mhm,
And in this case, I think we also just use the original cover, which also sometimes is done and
mhm.
sometimes isn't, depending on the market. And I mean, it's a whole language design and the way, romance novels look completely different in the States than they do here. It's like a totally different graphic
But,
language.
mhm.
So that's kind of justifying the
And
publisher's side on this.
I noticed on the cover, the figure in red square is a woman, which makes perfect sense. On the US cover, the figure is a man running. So
Interesting. I thought they were the same. I was looking at it now. Look at
no,
it.
no.
Very interesting. Um, so let's talk a little bit about research. Before that, I want to ask, I mean, it's a fairly thick book. How long did it take to write it? And how much of that time was spent doing research?
So this book took me longer than usual. It took me about 2 years to write. Um, it normally will take me about a year to write a book. Um, but um, I did a lot of research and it took me a while to sort of make the book feel authentic. And So that means to make it feel as real as possible uh, to my readers. And that involved all kinds of things. I mean, I had to go into the woods in New Hampshire, and in January when it's ice cold, and camp out and see what it would have been like. And I hired two uh, guides who do wilderness guides to show me how to do it and what the tricks were for making a fire and for getting food and that kind of thing. I didn't know otherwise. Um, and I tracked down the captain of a super yacht who often is hired by Russian oligarchs. I wanted to know what the yachts were like, what the passengers are like, what the amenities are like. And, he told me that on most of the ships, the oligarch ships that he captains, there were tanks of lobsters, there were freezers just for ice cream. Some had submarines in their garages below the boat. Um,
In case they have to escape?
no, that was actually in order to take their passengers, their friends, out to see the bottom of the ocean. If you've got the money, flaunt it,
Yeah. So how long did the research take?
So the research probably took me about a year, but the research, in my case, the research always yields plot ideas and scene ideas. It's not just research, it's plotting as well. So while I was talking to the captain of the super yachts, I already had several really interesting scenes pop into my mind that I asked him about. So the research phase is actually a combination of research and plotting. I do both at the same time.
Right. And how do you go about researching something like oligarchs? I mean, you obviously can't call one and ask questions. How do you kind of fact check? Um, how much of it do you sort of imagine or makes assumptions?
Mhm. Well, I I won't say I talked to people who identified themselves as oligarchs, but I talked to people who you might consider oligarch adjacent, um, and people who um, worked for oligarchs or had been married to oligarchs or um, had some kind of a personal relationship with a Russian oligarch. I didn't want the oligarch to be one-dimensional. I didn't want him to be just a bad guy or something like that. I wanted him to be a loving family man, warm and appealing, and at the same time, sort of sinister. And I wanted that warmth, the family warmth, to draw in Paul, our hero, who comes from a small, isolated, and cold family. His father was half crazy. His mother died when he was young. And Tatiana's family really appeals to him. So he's marrying not just this beautiful woman, but he's marrying into a warm, welcoming family.
And a lot of money.
And a lot of money, and is forced to sign a prenup, of course,
Right.
which would happen. I talked to a lawyer who had drawn up prenups for exactly this sort of thing, for people who've married into the families of oligarchs. And they are very restrictive prenuptial arrangements, making sure that if you marry in and you divorce, you end up with nothing.
So we talked a little about the war in Russia, but I want to ask something a little bit wider. I mean, it kind of feels like in the past, let's say 5 years, you wake up in the morning and the world has completely changed and shifted and things moved and suddenly there's another war going on and everything is just in sort of constant movement. And I want to ask about what it's like to write in times like these, particularly thrillers, but not just because I mean, technology wise and politically and economically, things are just constantly in movement all over the world right now.
Yes, yes. And it reminds me of my first Russia book, the Moscow Club, where everything was changing in Russia as I wrote. And I finally decided I had to stop updating and I would capture Russia at a certain time. And in the case of the oligarch's daughter, I felt there were so many things changing around the world that the best I could do was to say, this is what it's like in 2025. And if things change after that, that's out of my hands. You just have
Right.
to do,
Which is also a little problematic because this is what we are experiencing during 2025. But when we look at it 10 years from today, we'll get a
yep,
different picture. We'll get a farther look at what really happened.
right. And so it's sort of like a World War II thriller like The Eye of the Needle or something like that, where everything is frozen in the past, but it captures a period of time during the war. And I felt the oligarch's daughter could capture the period of time that we're in right now, um, this weird ambivalence we have toward Russian oligarchs, even the weird ambivalence that the US has toward Russia, um, which was not the case 5 years ago. So um, it the best I could do was to freeze time and to say, this is what it's like as of writing in 2025.
Right. And on that same sort of note of change, I want to talk a little bit about Israel, your connection with Israel, how updated you are, and how that affected the publication of the book in Hebrew. Because we do have these days a lot of issues around publishing translated fiction, sadly. We have a lot of cancellations, a lot of writers who don't want to be associated in any way with a Hebrew translation.
Right.
So that's the first question. And the second is if you feel like the book might have been received differently in pre-October 7 Israel compared to your other books, for example.
Um, well, I am not one of those writers who refuse to be published in Israel, obviously. I love Israel. I once lived for a month on a kibbutz in Israel, planting cucumbers, I think. So I did a lot of farm work at a kibbutz called Tel Yosef uh, in Israel. And I visited maybe 10 years ago with my wife and daughter and really loved it. And I still do love Israel. Um, and I find myself in a difficult position in the US because there is so much anti-Israel sentiment, as you all know, and anti-Semitism as well. And um, people are afraid to take the side of Israel in the age of Netanyahu. I think a lot of Americans associate Israel directly with Netanyahu, whereas I know from my friends in Israel that you can be a devoted, patriotic Israeli and not necessarily support the president. Um, that's how I feel in the United States.
I think a lot of Russians, by the way, also
Yeah,
experience very similar sentiments.
yes, that's a good point. Um, just because I didn't support Trump and don't support Trump doesn't mean I don't love America.
Yeah. Have you had any feedback about the reception of the book in Israel? Have you heard kind of?
I've just gotten emails from readers, which has been very nice.
Oh, that is nice.
Yeah, early, of course. But you asked me, would the reception of the book be different pre-October 7th? That's hard to answer. I mean, after October 7th, Israel is understandably obsessed with what's going on within its borders. Um, and has to regard a book like The Oligarch's Daughter as some kind of escapism.
Yeah, that's kind of what we see as publishers is
Huh?
we have seen a shift in the way
Mhm.
people read.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if you felt that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the same in the US, frankly. There was a time when writing about Russia was exactly in line with the politics. And now I think people have separated politics from what they read.
Yeah,
For entertainment, that is.
which is probably wise, yes.
Which I
Uh,
think is healthy.
I think we should all stop reading the news at this point, personally. But yeah, particularly when it comes to books, uh,
Yeah,
we need a little escape from every day. Are you working on something new?
I am. I'm working on the beginning of a series.
Would you be willing to tell us a little bit, or is it still?
It's still early. It is set in the US, and it involves two people, a married couple who took the so-called Trump buyout at the CIA. He used to work at the CIA, but it got out as Trump took over. Um, and that's based on some CIA people I know who got out of the business as soon as Trump took over and then appointed his own Trumpy CIA director. Uh, and it's become a very different place. So I thought
Right.
that was interesting to write about.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, I kind of thought I understand more why I liked this book so much. Although, as I said, I'm not a big thriller fan. It's because there's a lot of depth. I think you're very passionate about these things, and it's not a superficial level of this guy killed that guy. But no, you really dig deep into that, and I think that's kind of one of the reasons I thought it was so interesting, and it caught me, even though it's not sort of up my alley in terms of
Yeah,
what I usually like. So
that's
I,
one.
I always I always enjoy other people being passionate about something else. I think it's very contagious. So
Yeah, yeah. I felt very passionate about this book. I really did.
yeah, I
I,
think it really reads.
I loved writing it, I have to say. It's my of all my books, it's my favorite.
I really, really enjoyed reading it. I'm going to let other people talk a little now. So Sarit, I see you wanted to ask a few questions. Sarit? Okay, so we'll go back to her. Or wanted to ask a question.
Yes, hi, Mr. Finder, big
Ah,
fan. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
thank you.
I've read most of your books. And also, what's your the last movie I've seen of one of your books was High Crimes with Morgan Freeman and Ashley Judd. And I wanted to ask, are you considering writing books that in the beginning that they are meant to be movies or TV series, and does it affect the writing process? And also, being Jewish yourself and having been studied in two of the main institutions in the world, how do you feel about being Jewish at this time of this era? Being a Jewish student, are you involved in some of the discussion that there is in the States regarding it? Thank you.
Yeah, those are two very different questions. So I I do not write with the idea of a TV series or a movie in mind. The Oligarch's Daughter is in fact being adapted right now as a limited TV series. Um, but I learned actually when I wrote High Crimes that when you write a novel, a 400-page novel, when they adapt it for the movies, they're going to gut it. They're going to take 400 pages and condense it to 100 double-spaced script pages. And that means they're going to lose a lot of characters and they're going to lose a lot of nuance. I mean, I love TV and movies, especially good ones, but it's hard to do. And um, I sort of feel that I get to do things in a novel that a screenwriter doesn't get to do. You can be in a character's head, for instance, several people's heads when you're writing a novel, which you can't do in a movie or TV series. You just can't do that. And um, so I write ignoring the possibility that it might become a TV series or a movie. Otherwise, you go crazy. It makes no sense. Um, you asked me then also what it's like to be a Jew at this time. Um, Mostly what I find is that I get into arguments with friends. Um, and even my daughter, who went to Columbia, and loves Israel and loves Judaism, uh, uh, feels differently about what's going on in Israel than I do. And that is really common. I mean, she's 31, but people who are in the 20s, the teens and 20s and early 30s have a different feeling about Israel. Uh, Israel, when I was growing up, Israel was an underdog. And now even though I think they still are, they're not considered as such. So it's more complicated to be a Jew today in the United States.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful answer. Very complicated.
Thank you.
Right. I mean, historically, I don't think it's ever not been complicated being a Jew. If I look at, it's always complicated. It's complicated. So we had a question from Morag.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that meeting. I really appreciate it. I'm a big fan. What do you enjoy reading the most?
What do I enjoy reading the most?
Yes.
Um, I enjoy reading most of all novels about families. This is always what has interested me. It may be because I came from a family of seven, and you talk about complicated. The relationships among siblings, when there's five kids in a family, can be very complicated. Uh, so I love novels about families most of all. Uh, and I love stories about marriages. Um, I tend not to read other thrillers, especially when I'm writing a thriller. I I can't do that. I have to read something different enough that it doesn't poison what I'm doing. It doesn't get into the bloodstream of what I'm writing.
Right. We were talking about Russians earlier, so I think, like being Jewish, family is also always complicated, and I personally can't help but think of Tolstoy with all happy families are
Yep.
alike.
Yep.
Oh yeah, we're Jewish and we have families. As complicated as it gets.
Right.
Saga had an interesting question. No? Okay, I'll just read it myself. Do you use AI research at all while writing? Which I think is really
I
an
do.
interesting
I
question.
do. I think that AI has gotten really good for research. Um, I don't use it for writing because I've learned that it generates um, pasteurized, homogenized prose. It sort of takes prose from a million different books and combines them into one mediocre whole. But when it comes to research, AI is really useful. Um, I can ask a question about, for example, I had analogy I wanted to make in The Oligarch's Daughter um, about medieval instruments of torture. And I asked ChatGPT to give me examples of medieval instruments of torture. And I got a warning notice saying that we don't condone this sort of thing and this has been reported and that kind of thing.
Don't
And
try
so
this at home.
I realized what you have to do when you in the prompts is to say, uh, for a work of fiction, for a work of fiction, tell me about medieval instruments of torture. And then there's no problem.
I think I actually saw like a mug a while ago that says something like, don't panic about my search history. I'm a writer.
Right.
For all the things.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. How do you kill someone
This is
undetectedly?
work.
Right. I
Okay,
swear.
Ophir had a question, and Ellie after that.
Yes, I have a question. First of all, I love the meeting. I enjoy it. Thank you, Joseph, for your time and you give us. And my question is, what give you the head start to write thrillers from the beginning?
Um, I, when I was 8 years old, was when I decided to become a writer. And I had read some novels that were, you would sort of call them science fiction for young adults. And I loved the book so much, I wrote to the author, and she actually answered me. And we had a pen pal relationship that went back and forth for 3 or 4 years. And that was when I realized that behind every novel was a human being who makes these narrative decisions. And I thought, how cool is that? I want to do that. Um, but I didn't figure out that I wanted to write a thriller until, well, we had all the Ian Fleming books around in our house, and I read some of the Bond books. I was a little too young to read them, but I read them. And when I was in college, I was in a singing group that toured around Europe, and one member of the group had brought several huge hardcovers of Robert Ludlum, The Born Identity and the Mattery Circle and the Chancellor Manuscript and this kind of thing. And everybody in the group was reading these books and reading them and passing them around. And I said, what is this that is grabbing everyone's attention? And so I picked up The Born Identity, and I was lost in it immediately. I sort of loved it. And I decided I wanted to do something that would capture people's attention in the same way. And that was when I decided I wanted to write a thriller.
Nice answer. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, it took me a while. I mean, what I ended up doing was to read. I made a list of the best thrillers and mysteries written by talking to some experts, and I read them all and took notes about the characters, the protagonists, the antagonists, how they met, what the opening was like, what the conclusion was like, what the middle part of the book was like. So I studied thrillers as if I was a graduate student. So that's how I learned how to write a thriller.
Okay, before
Thank
we
you.
move on to our next, I have to ask who this writer was that you corresponded with.
Well, she's not very well known, but her name is Eleanor Cameron. And Eleanor Cameron was a very popular writer. Her books came out at the same time as Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. So she was, I think, her reputation was somewhat eclipsed by Madeleine L'Engle's, whose books I also loved. And then Eleanor Cameron, years later, when I was at Harvard, Eleanor Cameron came to Harvard, to Radcliffe, as a fellow. And I heard she was there, and I wrote her a letter and said, "You're not going to remember me, but you wrote to me back and forth for 4 or 5 years, maybe, when I was a kid." And she said, "I do remember you." And I said, "Can you please come over for dinner?" And my girlfriend and I had made dinner for her. And it was great.
That's a great story. It's really beautiful. Okay, so Farid, I
Yeah.
see you have some questions.
Yes. Can I ask, where are you from in the USA?
Well, I was born in Chicago. I spent the first 5 years of my life in the Philippines and then Afghanistan because my father was a Fulbright lecturer. He was setting up centers for teaching English as a second language in Manila and in Kabul, Afghanistan, and eventually moved to upstate New York. So I guess I consider myself an upstate New Yorker, not downstate New York, not New York City, but upstate New York, which is very different.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? We have time for about 1 or 2 more questions.
Any visit to Israel anytime soon, maybe?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do you plan to come visit Israel anytime soon?
Yes, I do.
We
I
have
do. I want to come sometime within the next year or two.
I would avoid August, personally.
Yeah.
But otherwise. All right, so we're going to wrap it up at this point.
There's a question, Hedva?
Oh, wait.
Okay, it's not Hedva, Hedva is my wife.
Okay.
Uh,
Sorry.
I My original question was, in writing, was what experience you had in Afghanistan, but of course now you told us that you've been there for several long time. The question is, what conclusion you can draw from the fact that the United States abandoned Afghanistan to the terrorists eventually.
Mhm.
What kind of recommendation you would give to future situations like this?
Well, yeah, I think that we got involved in the war in Afghanistan, not knowing how complicated that was going to be as a war. And as usually happens in America, public relations, public opinion changed on the war. And, and our president decided to pull us out of there. And basically giving power to the Taliban. Um, and Look, I think we're on the verge of abandoning Ukraine too. And It's a real flaw in the system that we elect presidents every 4 years, and Americans, I think, in general, are not very educated and well-read, and they tend to elect leaders based on strong feelings, not based on anything else. And that can really mess up foreign relations. I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but am I?
Yeah, but I understand, but what kind of advice would you give to the Israeli Prime Minister how to change this perception? I, uh, Otherwise, not just resign, but or change the government, but what direction should it take to improve the situation?
I really can't answer that. I'm sorry. I don't know enough about domestic Israeli politics right now. Um, I sort of feel like I would be speaking out of ignorance. Um, and I know that there is a coalition, and uh, it's an uneasy coalition between the far right and Netanyahu. And uh, uh, it doesn't feel stable to me. Um, so I'm sorry, I'm evading your answer, I guess.
I want to shift us back to literature before I get chronically depressed. Uh, so Nico, sorry, this is my escapism territory.
Yeah.
If I want to feel bad, I'll go read Haaretz. So Nico wants to know what you do if and when you have writer's block.
Oh, if I have writer's block, first of all, I tell myself that plumbers don't get plumber's block, okay? That it's a job. And I diagnose myself. There's always a reason. And rather than giving in to writer's block and saying, I just can't write, I will say, okay, is the problem that you haven't figured out the next step in the book? In which case, you have to go back and read a few chapters and bring yourself back up to speed. Or maybe you need to do more research. Maybe you need to talk to someone. Um, and failing all that, I go for a walk or for a run, and or go swimming or something like that, and just clear my head. Uh, and finally, what I do when I'm really desperate is I I read my notes before I go to bed. And in the morning, I always wake up with the solution. It's like putting my brain, it's like my brain is a slow cooker, you know, and it cooks overnight and it provides the answer to me inevitably. So those are my solutions to writer's block.
Really good, thank you. And our last question, which two people asked, okay, Nico, thanks you, is if you were ever planning on writing something that takes place in Israel.
Yeah, I've thought about it. Uh, I may. I think at the very least to have several scenes set in Israel would work really well. It doesn't have to be an entire book set in Israel only.
All right. Yeah, that's also going to require some research.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to describe Israel these days. So, let alone someone from the outside.
Yeah. No, I probably will.
Okay. Joseph, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating hour, and thank you for the book. And I think I speak for everyone when I say we look forward to anything else that you will write for us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for being booksellers, which I think is one of the greatest jobs there is and most important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. It was an honor.
Thank you, Joseph. Good luck.
תודה רבה לכל מי שלקח חלק כאן בפעילות שלנו. תמשיכו לעקוב אחרינו, אחרי הפעילויות של סטימצקי, נעשה עוד ועוד מפגשים כאלה, בין אם פרונטליים או בין אם וירטואליים. אני שוב אזכיר שהספר של ג'וסף מחכה לכם בתשיעייה לכל מי שעוד לא קרא וקראה, וזה עד סוף החודש, כמובן לאחר מכן גם יהיה על המדפים שלנו ובכל מקום בחנויות. אבל נצאו את המחיר האטרקטיבי עד סוף החודש.
איך אתה הגעת לזה? בתשיעייה. ראיתי פיינדר.
בדיוק, כן, זה בתשיעייה שלנו. המון המון תודה לכולם, ונתראה במפגש הבא שלי ושל אביגיל. תודה רבה.
תודה לכם.
תודה שירלי, תודה אביגיל.
תודה רבה.
תודה.